The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi there, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us for today's second webinar, and we have a super webinar planned for you. Now, as always, before we do anything, can I please ask that you raise your hand in the air and let me know that you can hear me loud and clear? The sound is fine. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, great. Okay, I'm putting your hands down. So this is what we're going to do from now on. We're going to see if we can beat the record from last time. So that's actually the new record. 62% of you put your hands in the air. So we're going to see if we can beat that next time. So next time you're on, please put your hand up in the air because it's just a little game that I like to play. Now, as always, I encourage you to do two things. One is to jump onto the Facebook wall. That's facebook.com/WBECS or WBECS. You should be familiar with that now. Please take the time to post your feedback after the session. And if you have any questions or comments or anything that you just kind of stuck with, and even if it's throughout the session, because we're going to have probably a couple of stops throughout to ask questions. But if you don't have that question answered and we move on to the next session, please just post it on Facebook. There's a little photo that should be on there. I haven't had a chance to check yet, but it almost certainly will because my team is so awesome, of all of our panelists today. And if you can just post it underneath there, then at some point, I'm sure one of the panelists will get some time to answer that question for you. Now, what I'd like to do is introduce you to our amazing panel, and I'm going to give 3 seconds to the person, to whoever's got their phone just ringing, just to give them a chance to just make sure that it's not the person I'm going to introduce. But so here we are. First of all, we have Dr. Susan Mayer. Susan is the president of the International Association for Coaching, which is she's an executive coach and personal development coach and author of chapters in the best-selling Transformative Learning in Practice and the Handbook of Adult Education. Her Women Living for Today and Tomorrow workshop series was featured in the New York Times, and then she's now the president of the International Association of Coaching and has over 20 years experience working with top-tier government, corporate, and non-profit clients. Aileen Gibb is an internationally known coach and facilitator of leadership, team, and organizational growth. Aileen grew her practice in the fuel industry to work worldwide with a wide range of organizational cultures. Her publications include Being Coached and Being a Leader. For over 15 years, she has inspired, stretched, and stimulated the future by equipping people to step beyond their known horizons and unleash new possibilities of success. Now, Krishna Kumar is the founding director of the Intrad School of Executive Coaching. He is a pioneer in the sphere of leadership and executive coaching in India, and the founding director, as I said, of the Intrad School of Coaching, which is ISEC. He's also the president of Intrad Consult and a partner in the Silk Road Partnership. He coaches leaders worldwide and is also an internationally recognized tennis coach. Natalie Tucker Miller is our final panelist, who is a past president and lead certifier of the International Association of Coaching. She's an internationally recognized speaker who works with leaders in the elder care industry and provides training and coaching for executives and staff. Natalie is a professional coach who specializes in family strategy. She's the lead certifier, as I said, and certifier examiner at IAC. She's the founder of Ageless Sages, the first publishing company specializing in illustrated books for elders. She began Ageless Sages when she recognized an underserved need within the elder development stage of life. So, it's my great pleasure to hand over to Dr. Susan Mayer. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you, Ben. It's delightful to be with everyone today. It might be morning, it might be afternoon, it might be evening where you are, so I'm not going to get specific. We are going to talk about leaders as coaches this evening. We are talking about 4 leadership mantras and the 9 IAC coaching masteries and how those work together to develop leaders who are also coaches. We see this becoming increasingly important as the nature of the workplace changes and as more and more people are working collaboratively. So we're going to start with an overview of what we're talking about, of the concepts. First, how do we define leadership? Establishing a clear vision, sharing that vision with others so they will follow willingly, providing the information, knowledge, and methods to realize that vision, and coordinating and balancing the conflicting interests of all members and stakeholders. Quote from Sir John Whitmore: "Leaders for the future need to have values and vision and to be authentic and agile, aligned, and on purpose." So the 4 mantras that we're working with grew out of a conference that Krishna Kumar, one of our panelists, led recently in India. And they are enlightened leadership, awakened leadership, timeless leadership, and lateral leadership. I'm going to give you a brief definition. Then we're going to talk about the IAC masteries and circle back around and give you some examples of using these principles in leadership and with leaders. So, enlightened leadership. Leaders of the future will focus on human development as the virtue that brings both tangible and intangible benefits, not just for the individual or organization, but the community as a whole. This means that the coach has to engage the leader to look within himself while taking decisions that enhance the quality of life for society at large. So it's a very broad view of leadership. Awakened leadership. Leaders need to be self-aware, to have an awareness going beyond the knowledge of their own selves to knowing really about others, and this helps them understand and influence their followers. Coaching awakens deeper levels of self-awareness in leaders. And in turn, coaching subordinates awakens deeper levels of self-awareness in an entire organization. Timeless leadership. A modern leader is one who acts after deep reflection, not just on the fly. His mind is open to the wider reality and the larger context in which decisions should be taken. He is thus able to see patterns and find connections that extend beyond the organization. And finally, lateral leadership. I think we all know by now that command and control just isn't working anymore. These structures and organizations are being rapidly replaced by all kinds of new models that depend on team building, on working together, on working across units. Leaders will need to function by influencing and persuasion at all levels within the organization. So, can I turn my mic up a little? That's as loud as it goes. So having given you those 4 mantras, I'm wondering if we should just stop for a minute and see if there's any questions about those big concepts before we start talking about the masteries. So Ben, can you just check and see if anybody has a question they'd like to type in?
Yeah, sure. If anyone has any questions, please post them in the box on the right-hand side. We don't have anything that's come through so far, Susan, because other than as I said, just in terms of turning up your microphone just a little piece, I think just after I put that in there, it actually went back. One of the questions actually somebody has actually asked is everybody going to be getting the handouts or the slides afterwards? Are you going to be able to make those available, Susan?
We are going to make the slides available right after, well, tomorrow morning. We will have the slides available so that everyone can have them. And we will also be sure that the slides are available from last year's presentation where we went into a little more detail on the masteries.
Thank you. Okay. Right, we have some questions
So
coming through now. Do you want me to ask? Would you like to take a question, Susan?
Sure, we'll take a couple.
Okay. So in this framework, how does a leadership balance the need for leadership in the immediate and over time with noticing patterns, etc.?
I think that in the immediate situation, in an emergency situation, probably many of the rules of leadership go by the wayside. It depends. If you're in a crisis, sometimes you have to take an action and then reflect afterwards and see if you need to adjust that action. One of the examples that we're going to come to a little later on will go into a lot of detail, where I'm going to be talking about what happened during Superstorm Sandy and how managers reacted to that. So you'll be hearing more about that later. Can we take
Fantastic.
one more and then perhaps we'll move on and leave more questions in a little bit?
That would be super. Okay. I'd like to know, of these four, have you seen these demonstrated in the lives of great leaders of the past?
Um, I've seen them demonstrated in the lives of great leaders in the future, and I'm going to ask Krishna. A colleague of yours has written a book on timeless leadership, and if you can just provide his name and that reference.
Yeah, the colleague in question is a gentleman called Dr. Debashish Chatterjee, and he's a professor at the B School here, one of the leading B schools, and he talked about timeless leadership, particularly in the context of large corporations. So those of you who are interested, I guess you can just find it on Amazon. The book is called Timeless Leadership by Professor Debashish Chatterjee.
And we'll add that to the slides. And his source material for this actually was the Bhagavad Gita. So that's going back pretty far for leaders who have been using these principles. So I think we should move forward. So why should we teach leaders the ISC Masteries as a framework for working with modern leadership? We think coaching is as much of a mindset as it is a process and a related set of skills. And the Masteries provide a framework for both developing a coaching mindset that that aligns with 21st century, leadership. I'm behind the times. So I'm going to turn this over to Natalie now, who is going to take us through the Masteries so that you understand the other half of the framework.
So hello, everybody. When we saw the leadership mantras and saw how beautifully they aligned with the Masteries, well, we just couldn't resist putting the two together and seeing what we came up with. As you look through the leadership mantras, you're going to see many parallels with the Masteries, because the Masteries are about self-awareness and reflection and all of those other concepts and keywords that we've heard in the mantras. So I'd like to go through quickly. We won't spend a whole lot of time on this, and as Susan said, the slides will be available. But if we just kind of take a quick look at Masteries 1 through 9 and see where maybe some of that overlap might be, or see how the Masteries really support modern leadership. So Susan, if you can put the first slide up for Mastery number 1, establishing and maintaining a relationship of trust. And one of the concepts that I pulled from this particular Mastery was mutual respect and acceptance, which needs to happen in order to actually maintain a relationship of trust. I think you can sometimes establish trust without some of those deeper concepts, but in order to maintain it, you really do need to have a deeper level of I thought of the lateral leadership here, where the command and control structures in an organization are being replaced by newer models. And this quote speaks to that. Power people are generally threatened by authority people. And from the book Servant by James C. Hunter. And one of the reasons that is so is because authority people have far more sustainable influence than power people. So we really are moving away from that model and into much more of an authority or an influence model in leadership. Mastery number 2, which is perceiving and affirming the client's potential. And part of that mastery is to encourage and empower And that's really what we want to do. We don't want to overpower people in this new model. We've really moved into a new consciousness. So encouraging others and empowering others benefits everyone. It benefits the larger picture. If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. That was John Quincy Adams. So that answers that question from earlier, too, about do we see some of these leadership models from the past, and we absolutely do. So the next slide, Susan. And engaged listening. And this is one that I think many times across any, whether coaching or leadership or management or really any profession, and we think, well, of course, that's an important skill to have. But there's so much to this one mastery of engaged listening. Oftentimes we'll hear what someone says, but we're not really listening. We're not listening on that really deep level. So once you get to the point where the person that you're listening to is feeling understood and not judged, and you really get them, you've really hit a sweet spot. The task of leadership is not to put greatness in people, but to elicit, and the slide is gone. So I can't finish reading that quote. Okay, but for the greatness that is there already, John Buchanan, and that really is what we do when we listen, when we truly, deeply listen to someone. It helps them to feel gotten, and it elicits their best self. We are not trying to make them into anything that they're not. Mastery number 4, which is one that we see quite frequently these days, not just in leadership but across the board, with, again, this new consciousness, processing in the present. We hear a lot about that these days. And processing in the present is really about being unencumbered by past or future preoccupations and being able to be right in the moment. And actually, when I speak later with my case study, I'm going to go into that a little bit more, because it's another one that can seem kind of light on the surface, but there's a lot of depth to this. And as Malcolm Forbes points out, presence is more than just being there. And mastery number 5, expressing. And part of this mastery includes building rapport through communication. And part of the way that we communicate and express ourselves with someone is as important as the engaged listening. We can help elicit somebody's greatness through the expression that we bring to the table. And I love this quote by Jessica Miranda: "If you can't hear me with your heart, I can never explain in words who I am." So expressing really does have a lot to do with the energy that really passes between two people during a communication. And number 6, clarifying, uncovering the unknown. And this is, as any coach knows, this is one of the really foundations of helping a client get to where they want to be once you understand and have clarity around your vision. So a leader's role is to raise people's aspirations for what they can become and to release their energies so they will try to get there. And that's part of the way that we help our clients to clarify. That's part of the way that leaders can help people that are that they're working with to clarify and see the bigger vision. And mastery number 7, helping the client set and keep clear intentions. And part of the intention is to move forward purposefully. This is another one that on the surface might seem kind of simple, but when we start recognizing that it's the purposefulness, the meaningfulness, that really creates a more powerful sustainability in transformation, that's when this mastery really shines. So a leader is not, this was my favorite quote on all these slides. A leader is not an administrator who loves to run others, but someone who carries water for his people so that they can get on with their job. And that to me spoke volumes of the modern leadership mantras. And number 8, inviting possibility, enhancing the process of discovery. Faith is building on what you know is here so you can reach what you know is there. So, and I would even maybe add to that quote, and things that you don't know are there, and that's where the enhancing that process of discovery comes from. Finding out the things that maybe we have an inkling that we know that they're there, but we can't put it into words, or we can't quantify it, and suddenly, as you go through this process of discovery, you start understanding how this works more powerfully, and you help the people that are around you to enhance as well. So again, when you're thinking of these in terms of leadership models, they really are quite powerful. Number 9, helping the client create and use supportive systems and structures. And this is where the sustainable progress comes in. So we can do all those other things before this and go deeper and into that understanding of who the person is. And then it's really an important job for a leader to be able to help that person understand what they need in their lives, in their environment, in their work environment, in their personal environment, so that this is something that they can carry with them. It becomes part of their being and not just something that they try on and then forget. So when the effective leader is finished with his work, the people say it happens naturally.
Thank you, Natalie. I think that gets us off to a brilliant start with talking about this. And I think perhaps we might want to move on and look at one case and then stop after each case and get a little additional feedback from Natalie and get some questions from the group. So I'm going to move on to enlightened leadership. And this is Aileen.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Natalie, for that wonderful overview of how the masteries link to leadership. And it might just be worth also reminding our audience that underneath the main titles of the masteries that Natalie pulled out there, she pulled out only one subset of what that mastery is about. So in exploring them even further, there are many other links with leadership. This is my real passion. Good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to think about the masteries in relation to what it means to be a leader. And this was really where I started my own path, having come out of sales and general management at the time that I first discovered coaching, and then having the opportunity to use what I learned as a coach as very much part of the fundamental basis for my leadership style. And I was able to build 2 teams taking that approach. And now, when I think of myself coaching or facilitating or working with a team of leaders, one of those moments that I love is when there's an insight or an aha or a breakthrough, and someone turns to me and says something like, as we all know as coaches, wow, I didn't know how you did that, but it was really powerful. And there's that moment of enlightenment, that moment of seeing something in a way that it hadn't been seen before. And I remind myself then that I feel I'm a combination of a coach and a leader in that moment. The essence of leadership, in fact, the word leader in itself means quest or to ask questions, which of course is what we're doing all the time as coaches, and asking those questions that move the story and the journey forward. So when I'm working with teams and they bring this moment of enlightenment to the table, it provides that perfect opening for me to share and introduce to them more of how these masteries shape my approach and enable them as leaders to think about different ways that they could be showing up as they learn more about what I think are essentially masteries around about some fundamental patterns in human behavior. So personally, I'm committed to leveraging the value of these masteries in the world of leadership in 2 ways. By continuing to use them as my own foundation as a coach and a leader, and by introducing and explaining them more to leaders I work with, and inviting them to explore how that deeper understanding might shape their leadership in the modern world. I have one example recently from working with a senior leadership team, about 4 people in the room with me, and one of the things we kept hearing was this theme of how I'm too busy with my day job to think about the strategic leadership questions. And one person in the team actually said, well, it's my day job that I get paid for. And there was just a moment of silence in the room, and the leader of that team basically paused and asked the question, but is that what we get paid for? Aren't we getting paid as leaders to do the more enlightened thinking, to think strategically, to look at where the business is going? And so how is it that we are caught up in this day-to-day activity? And I think that's a common pattern that we come across certainly in business and corporate leadership today. So in that context, I thought of two masteries in particular, although I'm sure I used several of them in an integrated way. That listening, mastery number 2, enabled me to hear the underlying mindset that these leaders were essentially trapped by in that moment. And I was able to invite them to listen more deeply to what they had just said and heard around that statement, and to reflect on what it really meant for them as leaders. And it was one of those beautiful moments where there's this silence and holding the silence, and that enlightenment, that awareness coming through. You could almost hear their brains clicking as they all came to the same realization that, you know, they'd been listening for the busyness of every day instead of listening for what they needed to do as leaders. And we followed that up with another question representing mastery number 8, inviting possibility. Because the question that came to me in that moment was, what if they were paid only for doing strategic thinking and long-term visioning and really stepping up to that future of their organization as leaders? What would the value for their business be then? And again, there's several ahas in the room as they sat with that realization and started to explore what it would take for that to happen. So with this more enlightened view of who they were as leaders, and the demonstration or the understanding that they could take something like our masteries from the coaching world and use more engaged listening, be more proactive in inviting possibilities into their day-to-day activities, imagine how powerful they could be as leaders.
Thank you, Aileen. Natalie, do you have anything to add to that? If not, perhaps there are some questions from the group. Ben, can you see if there are any questions that anyone would like to ask Aileen at this point?
There certainly are. Okay. Here's a question. How do you get away from command and control structures? Leadership in commercial organizations, which are output driven.
That's a wonderful question that I'm wondering if we can save for a few minutes, because that's actually one of the things I'm addressing. Although, Aileen, you may have something to say about that as well.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment on it. For me, that question goes to the heart of why it's beneficial for leaders to explore something like the masteries as part of their style. What I say to them is that if you enter the conversation more from a questioning perspective, in the same way as we do from coaches, and you move the conversation through to an action, then a lot of the intention I bring to my coaching in corporate with leaders is that they're actually accelerating the capacity of their people to get to those results.
Thank you very much.
Great. Do we have another question?
Yeah, we do. We have a question that a couple of people have asked. How do the coaching masteries differ from the ICF core competencies?
Oh my goodness, that is a long question.
I was going to say, that's a huge question.
It is an enormous question. If you look at the core of every coaching system, since most of them are brainchildren of Thomas Leonard, you will find a high level of similarity among the ICF competencies, the Coachville proficiencies, and the IAC masteries. One of the things that makes the masteries different is that, and Natalie can speak to this better than I can since she was a big part of this, is that as an organization we engaged in a process that took about 2.5 years of looking at what were the essential things that made coaches successful, convening international panels to put these concepts into language that could be universally understood, and coming up with very, very clear examples of what it looks like when you're using these masteries and when you're not using these masteries. Natalie, what have I left out?
Well, I think that your point initially about the way that these were developed, there is a lot of crossover. You can look at, core competency number 5, active listening, and surely it aligns with mastery number 3, engaged listening. Or core competency number 6 of powerful questioning, and certainly mastery number 6, clarifying. There's some crossover there. The masteries were developed by a global team of coaches who were listening for what was showing up in sessions that they were deeming masterful sessions. So I think if anything, the masteries are just more, maybe have, they're a bit more in depth. I'm not going to say that they have more depth than the ICF competencies, but the way that they're designed and the way that they're structured, that depth is easily accessible.
Beautifully put. We can perhaps take one more question and then let's move on and hear from Krishna, and we'll leave space for some questions after we hear from Krishna. So if there's one more pressing question, Ben.
Okay. How do you prepare yourself to be attentive using the masteries when you are in leadership?
Aileen, would you like to address that?
Yes. Could you repeat the question, Ben? Was that attentive?
Yes, I certainly will give it back. How do you prepare yourself to be attentive using the masteries when you are in leadership? It actually says in a leadership and then it stops. So I don't know if there's something after that.
In a leadership role.
In a leadership role, it could be, yeah.
Yeah. For me, that speaks to, I'm not sure if I'm interpreting the question effectively, so I'd invite the questioner to send in another question if necessary. For me, being attentive, this is about being attentive to your behavior.
Sorry, can I cut off? He's just jumped in with when you are in a leadership session.
Oh.
So let me go back to the question. How do you prepare yourself to be attentive using the masteries when you are in a leadership session?
Does that mean how I prepare myself in a leadership session or the leader prepares themselves? I think in either case, it's about for leaders, it's about being attentive to and aware of your behaviors. If the question is for me as a coach or facilitator in a leadership session, then it's part of my reflective approach. I have a very in the moment approach when I'm working with leaders, and the masteries for me are pretty embodied in who I am and what my approach is. So if the question is about me, I probably actually don't do any conscious preparation now because I've worked with them for so long and I'm practicing them in every coaching and in every session with leaders. If it's about a leader being attentive to them, I think it requires a leader to spend time with someone understanding the masteries and these links to leadership that we're exploring here in this session, experiencing what it is to work with a masterly coach, and instead of the coach perhaps just doing the coaching conversation with the leader, also stepping out of the coach role and doing an observational debrief with the leader around about the process that he or she experienced with that masterly coach, and then having a developmental conversation perhaps in terms of what that leader liked that they might like to take into their leadership approach. So trying to answer it from both perspectives there, Ben, and again, perhaps we could invite a thread on Facebook if I haven't addressed the real question there.
I think that'd be a wonderful place to take the discussion. I'm reminded of something that in the US we learned as children, and that was stop, look, and listen.
Yeah.
And to keep you safe when you're crossing the street. In a group of coaches that I spend time with, we often talk about stop, breathe, reflect, act. And I think that that's something that I use very often with the leaders I work with, taking that moment to stop, breathe, which gives you time to consciously reflect, and then move on to taking an action. This will make a great Facebook discussion, and we're looking forward to continuing it there. I'm going to move along now to...
This is Natalie, and I'm sorry to interrupt and take this further, but just quickly, what I can point to as far as the masteries are concerned based on this question is mastery number 4, processing in the present. And there we learn things like responding from awareness versus conditioned reactions. So this is the kind of work that the leader would do prior to, or ongoing rather, as they are honing their leadership skills. So they're using what's happening, in the moment as an opportunity for learning and discovery. So if you'll find a lot of the answers to that question right in Mastery 4.
Thank you, Natalie. And we're going to move on to Krishna now, who is going to speak about awakened leadership.
Thank you, Susan. It's been wonderful to be here. Hello, everyone. And I'm following the conversation which you've just heard from 3 of my wonderful colleagues, Susan, Natalie, and Eileen. For those of the attendees who came in a little later, I would like to rewind a little bit to what Susan began with when she said that the concept of the leadership mantras originated in a conference that we conducted in India earlier this month. And there were a number of leadership mantras that were talked about, but we selected 4 that we thought were really relevant in today's context. I'd like to begin with the context I sit in, which is in India now. And as all of you know, that we actually have a huge population here. I mean, it's more than 1.2 billion people. But what's interesting is that over 65% are below the age of 25, which makes it a very, exciting place to be in, primarily because we need to focus on where the new leadership is going to come from. I have a fairly long experience in coaching senior executives and business leaders, but for some time now I've been focusing on working with youngsters. And by young people, I'm really talking about people in the age group of 18 to 26, which is actually a very fascinating area to be in, because you come to understand the aspirations, the goals, the dreams of people who are probably going to lead not just the place where they're sitting in now, but probably on a global basis. So what I'd like to share with you in the next few minutes is a case that I picked up from the number of sessions I've had with a lot of young people, which I believe to be representative in the context of what we call awakened leadership. Now, the whole concept of awakened leadership actually came about when I shared a session with Sir John Whitmore, who was actually in India for the conference. He gave the keynote address. And John and I spoke on awareness, which is really the core of awakened leadership. And the story which I'm going to share with you, the small case, is about a young man who's maybe in his early 20s, a graduate, working in a large IT company, does business process outsourcing. His name is Neil. And the problem that Neil faces now is that he seemed, when he came to me, because his parents were good friends of mine, was that he seemed to be very uncomfortable with what he was doing. And as a coach, I followed the normal process where we made them go through a behavioral assessment and the rest of it, and I don't want to go through all the details of that. What I really like to share with you is the reasons for his confusion, and then going on how we could, in some way, the coaching helped him resolve and take some decisions which were specifically in the area of leadership. Neil is a very likable boy. I mean, he is, very a kind of boy who likes the outdoors, who's very much into sport. He is a great team player, so he says, and loves to motivate others. And, he has many traits that are absolutely wonderful. And he also said he likes to take decisions. So it was not too surprising that his present job didn't excite him at all. The question was, where did he want to go from there? And this is where, in my coaching sessions with him, I was able to use definitely quite a few of the IAC masteries, but in particular, 2-3 were very powerful. And those 2 or 3 masteries were perceiving, affirming, and expanding the coachee's potential, processing in the present, and inviting possibility. In our conversations, it was really going to and fro for quite some time, and there was a great deal of confusion in him because he has a very high degree of social orientation. He wanted to do work that was good for society, and couldn't really get a handle on where he could do that. Both his parents were very active in the church. His father is a very well-known counselor, so there was a tendency to move in that direction, but he somehow didn't want to be associated in any religious activity or in the NGO space. And in our sessions, I kept probing a little deeper and deeper, which was the exciting part, looking at, trying to get him to understand the depth of the potential that he had within him. On more than one occasion, he kept, coming back to the fact that he admired people in the clergy, but he didn't want to be a clergyman. So I had to actually sit with him and identify areas where we discovered aspects of being in the clergy that really appealed to him, which came down to the more management part of it. Like, he liked the fact that they were into organizing, coordinating, motivating individuals, and so on. The good thing is that over a period of time, we were able to go right back to his younger days and discovered that Neil had a keen interest in actually being part of the armed forces. He wasn't keen on the Navy or the Air Force, but he wanted to be in the Army. And following our sessions, he actually took part in the selection trials, very motivated, got into the Army, and now is doing an officer's course. Now, the beauty of the whole thing that came to my mind was that if he had remained where he was and had not gone through the coaching process, perhaps this leadership element in him would have remained latent, and we would probably have lost a possibility of potentially a good leader. The way I look at it is not just the 3 masteries that I talked about here, and I'm sure Natalie will add to that. The concept that I would really like to share with everybody is that when you sit through these sessions with particularly young people, there is so much awakening that takes place because a lot of their potential they're not aware about. And self-awareness comes primarily through the use of very, very powerful coaching in specific, in this case, I just talked about 3 masteries, but I'm sure most of the masteries come into effect. So over to you, Natalie, for if you would like to add something to what I just said, and then we're happy to take questions.
Yeah, Krishna, certainly you're right. There's so many of the masteries that show up in sessions like that, particularly when we are grooming the future leaders, as you pointed out in the beginning. I see mastery number 7 in here quite a bit. You know, you're asking the questions that are going to reveal the client's true intentions and bring the client back to what is most important for them. One of the distinctions in Mastery 7 is transform versus change. And it sounds like this young man was really on the brink of a transformation because of some of the ways that you introduced possibility to him. So that was really lovely.
We perhaps can take one question. I'm looking at the time, and we want to hear from 2 more people and open up the conversation to general questions. So if there's one question that you're seeing a couple of, Ben?
Okay. Just go back to Krishna. What are Krishna's 3 masteries by number in the example given?
Okay. The 3 masteries would be mastery number 2, which is perceiving, affirming, and expanding the client's potential, and processing in the present, which is mastery number 4, and inviting possibility, which was mastery number 8. I'd also like to add mastery number 7 now, based on what Natalie's inputs, which he shared, which is helping the client set and keep clear intention.
Okay, thank you, Krishna. I think we're going to move to Natalie next. Well, we're going to try to move to Natalie next. We're going to be talking about timeless leadership.
And as the slide says, the opportunity for deep reflection for leaders is modeled beautifully when working within an industry where the clients are in a reflective stage of life. And mine is a tale of 2 organizations within the same industry, one where the leader whose style was to wait for a situation to occur or a disaster to happen and then scramble to find an immediate solution. And this actually addresses one of the questions that had come up earlier. So when the crisis is past and considered over until another situation arose where then that same tactic was used. The other organization is led by a person who can take those same scenarios, but because of conscious attention to the broader scope of the organization, through reflection and through an understanding of the ripple effect of decisions, they have completely different and much more effective outcomes. And the industry that I'm talking about, the industry in which I work, is elder care. The population with whom these leaders work provides an unlimited opportunity for reflective growth, observing and learning from the very clients that they're serving because they're in that phase of life themselves. And this isn't limited, obviously, to just this industry. We have the opportunity to learn from all our clients and the people that we're called to lead. This just happened to be, too good an example to pass up based on timeless leadership definition. So within elder care, the second effective leader that I mentioned observes what the priorities are for the people in this stage of life. In order to find fulfillment in what lies ahead, many people in this age group are attentive to how the lessons they have learned in life serve them now. So they no longer have the need to repeat the past like we tend to do when we're a bit younger, and rather they make the connections on how the past has brought them to the point in which they currently live. There's a wisdom that they bring with them as they make these decisions that's going to impact their daily lives. Now, the first less effective leader saw orchestrating the care kind of as a series of tasks. There was a great deal, a lot of detail about, daily schedules and the more physical, maybe tangible needs of the people in her care as well as her staff and the people she was leading. And when, the inevitable, unexpected event would occur, because when you're dealing with human beings, whether they're in the elder stage of development or not, that's going to happen. But this leader looked no further than averting the disaster. Now, in the moment, that is absolutely a crucial skill. We have to know how to avert disaster when things like that arise. But the problem with that as a model, as a leadership model, is that there's no room for either prevention or a more skilled approach to the unexpected. So when your time and attention is focused on putting out fires, there's no way to see beyond the flames. And this is where the masteries really come into play. And though all of the coaching masteries are required for really this thoughtful and reflective leadership, one of particular relevance in this example for me is Mastery 4, processing in the present, being unencumbered by past or future preoccupations. And as I thought about that, I thought this may seem contradictory, because wouldn't putting out fires be in the moment, processing in the present? And the answer to that is no. In fact, there is very little presence in putting out fires. Yes, you're present in a physical sense, you're physically there, but the ability to process in those circumstances is severely compromised. You act, you react, and true presence comes from deep reflection that allows you to respond appropriately and see beyond the immediate. What created this? What lies beyond? These are the questions that will naturally be answered for a leader who understands the power of reflection and presence. And another mastery that jumped out for me was mastery number 7. That seems to be showing up a lot today, helping the client set and keep clear intentions, moving forward purposefully. Leaders that are bringing with them the clarity of intention that comes from recognizing patterns and connections. They're going to create an environment that lacks confusion and promotes meaning. And the elder developmental stage of life is unique in that we often overlook the concept of meaning in life. You know, when we're younger, we ask, you know, what is my purpose? I wonder what my purpose is. We kind of move towards that in a way that has meaning, and in a way that indicates the quest that lies ahead. But an elder implies something completely different when asking, what is my purpose? And perhaps with doubt that one even exists. A timeless leader, a leader who is well-versed in the masteries, knows that there is meaning and purpose in everything.
Thank you, Natalie. Let's see if we have a couple of questions for Natalie. Dan, what are you seeing?
Okay, thank you very much. Can you give an example of timeless leadership?
Natalie? Oh, I think we've lost Natalie's audio for the moment. I think perhaps one way that I see timeless leadership playing out is when the leader has to transcend the boundaries of kind of the here and now and what they're doing. And I know that that sounds a little bit mystical, but what happens often is the leaders in a situation where they have to really be outside of the immediate situation and looking at a much bigger picture and a much broader perspective. And I think perhaps the easiest way to illustrate for that might be for me to move on to my story, if that's okay, because I think that embodies a little bit of timeless leadership in this notion of lateral leadership. So we can come back and discuss that more. And yes, Natalie's back on the phone. So let me just ask if Natalie would like to address that briefly before I start talking about lateral leadership.
I just came back on, so I'm not sure what you mean. Why don't we move forward?
Okay, so we're going to come back with examples of timeless leadership, but for the moment, let's talk a little bit about lateral leadership. Last fall, I live in New York City, and we had the unfortunate presence of superstorm Sandy, which is hard to say, and it created a great deal of chaos in the city of New York. The client that I was spending most of my time with was the Human Resources Administration of the City of New York, which is the agency that provides all of the help to the homeless, to people with insufficient funds, to people who need jobs, to the elderly, to those who have been abused in some way. So they have a huge clientele. It is the largest agency in the city of New York, and their entire building was flooded out. Not only that, but many of the employees experienced damage in their personal homes, and some of them in satellite portions of the agency were also flooded out. Now, somebody had asked earlier, how do you move from command and control? And in this situation, it was easy to see that command and control simply wasn't working very well for most of the leaders. Everything was done by consensus. Everything was done in the moment. They didn't even know where they were going to be working half of the time. So they had to make up a whole new set of rules in order to keep on going. The masteries that I most noticed in this process were that the leaders had to, there was no way around this, be practicing mastery number 2, engaged listening. They really had to have a deeper understanding of what they were hearing, of what was going on, and they also had to create a great many more opportunities for conversation, because almost the entire agency was in a position where they were suffering from a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. Everyone was anxious, everyone was a little bit, I'm going to say cranky. Everybody was just having a hard time adjusting. So as leaders, the managers I worked with had to listen very carefully and very deeply to what their staff was saying. They also had to spend a great deal of time using mastery number 6, clarifying, because each situation involved a certain amount of untangling what was going on, figuring out what the different threads were, and really understanding the situation much more deeply before they could move on. They were constantly processing in the present. When all of a sudden you don't have your desk anymore, you don't have any of your files, you don't have your telephone, you don't know how to reach anybody, you're living in the moment, and you have to calm down and experience things more deeply. You can't be rushing to put out fires. You have to be stopping, being in the present moment, not thinking about yesterday, not thinking about tomorrow, to really understand what your next steps might be. So there's none of this what if and what's next kind of stuff. No, it's all right, how are we going to be in this moment and move forward? They also were very busy setting and keeping clear intentions, mastery number 7. They had to make up new rules on the fly. Many of them were in an open space setting for the first time in their career, and they discovered that if they sat down with their staff and had deep conversations with the staff, they could move to incredible levels of action that they had never been able to achieve when everybody was in their own little cubicle or their own little office and they never spoke to each other. Inviting possibilities was part of everyday existence in this new environment. And finally, I did a lot of work with all of them, and they did a lot of work with their staffs and the clients of the agency to create and use supportive systems and structures, which is mastery number 9. So Natalie's having thunderstorms and power surges herself at the moment. So she seems to have dropped away for the moment. So I'm going to open this up to some questions. And these can be questions for any of the panelists.
Okay.
So Ben, what have we got coming in?
Okay, here's a question. Are people bothered by elder care issues actually troubled by their own issues about aging?
I wish Natalie was here to answer that directly. I will say from discussions that we have had about this, yes, that often can be a factor. And there's also, there's a lot of lack of clarity about roles. What she has told me is that very often people feel that they need to treat the elders in their lives as if they were the children now, rather than responsible adults who can think for themselves. So both their own feelings about aging and what's going to happen to them in the future, and their feelings about what they perceive as a shift of relationship between them and their parents, all can affect interactions.
Super. Thank you very much for that, Natalie. In the Sandy situation in New York City, was your work primarily with the leaders, and they worked with their people? What specific role did you play?
I was coaching 15 mid to senior level managers, and helping them find ways to function, to keep the agency functioning, and to work with their staff to relieve the stresses that the staff were feeling under these circumstances. Um, People were forced to go to offices in different offices, so they were kind of in the outer boroughs, which meant that they were having commutes of up to 2 hours. They were in places where they didn't have a desk. They were in places where they were using their cell phone because there were no proper phones available to them. So my role was to keep my 15 leaders kind of calm and on course, and brainstorm with them what else could be done so that they could turn around and use those same skills and techniques with their staff.
Super. Thank you very much for that. What was your greatest challenge then?
It's hard to pinpoint any one thing. Probably my greatest challenge is going to sound trivial and silly in this, but my greatest challenge was finding ways to actually be in touch with my clients. They very much wanted to speak with me, and they were carving out the time to do this, but some of them were literally taking their cell phones and standing in front of a building because there was no privacy for them to have the conversation.
Okay. Did you have a prior relationship, or did you come in the middle of the crisis?
No, I had a prior relationship, but it was a fairly new relationship. This is the fourth round of coaching that my team and I have done with this agency. However, this round started about 3 weeks before the storm hit. So of my 15, 5 of them were repeat clients who I knew from an earlier cycle, and 10 of them I was just beginning to get to know. We'd only had a couple of sessions together. So we had to work very hard on trust issues very quickly for them to feel relaxed enough to work with me as we worked through this crisis. We're also open to questions for any of the other panelists about anything except for Natalie, who's unfortunately lost to a thunderstorm. But any questions you have for any of the other panelists, this would be a wonderful time to ask them as well.
Okay, so what is a good template or support for coaches to implement the masteries?
Okay, Aileen, would you like to take the first cut on that one?
Yeah, what's a good, I mean, the masteries themselves are a fabulous template to get familiar with and to use as a guide for your conversations. The slide that we showed at the start, where you saw all those circles, really demonstrates that they're a very complete and whole approach to essentially providing a conversation structure, and for a leader or a coach to be attentive to all of those elements coming into their conversation. They're purposefully, it's not a linear template. The circle is a very representative template because they almost create this container for a conversation there.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go way back in the slides if I can get this to work, to show the slide that has the has all of the masteries on it.
I think it's
so
10.
that people can see how they work together.
Yeah.
One of the things that we love about this as a system is that all of the masteries function together to create a whole. So you can see the way this diagram is set up is sort of a flower, that all of these things work together to create a structure, not only for coaching, but one of the things Natalie is fond of saying is, wouldn't it be wonderful if you could incorporate these into how you lead your life as well? Mm-hmm. Krishna, did you have anything to add?
I think both of you have said it brilliantly. There's very little more that I would add, except to reinforce what Eileen said. It was not a straight line. It was more like a circle, everything interconnecting with each other. It's not process driven, because that's typically what restricts good coaching. So the masteries that way, they're brilliantly structured, because you can reach out to any mastery at any given time that you think to be most suitable for the situation.
Thank you. Ben, do we have another question?
Okay. What business model would you use when coaching youth in their 20s or early 30s?
Krishna, that has your name on it.
I know. I mean, I would like a little clarity on business model, because I think they asking about what kind of commercial structure is being applied when coaching the youth. Is it pro bono or is it charged? Is that where it's coming from, Ben? Have I got it right?
I'm going to say yes in terms of the coaching business model. So how does what you're doing with the youth you're coaching early 20s to, oh, here we go, billing structures, marketing, group or individual coaching? So yes, so you got it right, Krishna. So,
right. I think it's a very interesting question, because that's something that I grapple with very often, because when you're reaching out to not a very well-defined segment in one form, that it's not really as simple to define as a corporate business model, for instance, or if I was specifically targeting the not-for-profits and so on. But here what happens is anybody between a certain age group is kind of fits in. What we've done is that I took 2-3 decisions personally, and I think this would not really apply globally. It would go country to country, situation to situation. What decisions we took here was that first we wanted to make it affordable, because largely the majority of the people whom we work with, they are still students, and we view them as students, and to a large extent they would come for these sessions sponsored by their parents, who also are very, very important stakeholders in the conversation. So we looked at it from that point of view, firstly. Secondly, if the person coming to us was below a certain age and still sponsored by the parents for education and so on, we involved the parents too. Because going forward, the young person would depend on parental support in some format. So that was the second model that we looked at, the second thing that we kept in mind. And the third one was institutions, reaching out through educational institutions like colleges, universities, you know, kids who are just about to go through their placement services, having some degree of confusion on what uh, you know direction they want to take. So these were where we actually ran a model which was in one or two cases funded by the university, saying that this is part of our placement activity. So there are multiple models you can look at. I'm just sharing some that we used. I hope that was useful and helpful.
This is Aileen here. I'd like to expand with an idea or perhaps even a challenge on this point. It's not something I can claim to have put into practice yet, but I've sat with it for some time now. It occurs to me that quite probably the majority in the corporate world of people who are accessing coaching are those higher layers of management. And I'd like to see a world where every time I invited or was invited to coach with a senior manager or leader, I'd like them to feel compelled to also give me a young leader in their 20s or 30s who's going to be you know, a leader of the future to coach as well. So I haven't actually implemented that model, but I'm just putting it out there as an idea.
I think that that's really going to be a direction that we're going to move in more and more in the future, Aileen, because the newest generation moving into the workplace just doesn't think the same way. These are
Yeah.
people who are dedicated to making things happen, dedicated to changing the world, but not necessarily dedicated to the kinds of rules that we may have grown up with in the workplace. And
Yeah.
this goes back to the command and control issue as well. These are people who don't want to be commanded and don't want to be controlled. They want to be seen as participants. They want to not be in charge, but be a leader when it's appropriate for them to lead. So as we push coaching down further into the organization, it seems to me that we are creating a very different kind of career path for younger people coming in.
Yeah.
So next.
Okay. Are you going to move on? Would you like any more questions?
We actually set aside the last few minutes here for some discussion, so we're open for questions.
Um, okay, there's lots of good feedback. Always good. Um, what were the key things that you did that made the most impact to the how dealt with the crisis situation? So this is going back to when you were talking about the crisis situation. It says, what were the key things you did that made the most impact to the, and it says how you dealt with the crisis situation, I think it's trying to say.
Okay, one of the key things that I did was make myself available for sort of laser coaching, short bursts of coaching when people needed it. So I simply said, look, I'm here, my phone lines are open, email me if I'm on a call, I'll call you back right afterwards. So increase the availability. The other thing that I did was I had more group sessions than I might have ordinarily had, where I would bring in 5 of the people I was working with at one time and encourage them to share their perceptions of the situation with each other and also share resources with each other, so that it ranged from high level things like actually knowing how to set up your computer differently, so that you could receive your email and things like that from a remote location, to really simple things like, where the heck do I get lunch in this neighborhood that I've never been in before? So we spent a lot of time doing stress management exercises, doing relaxation exercises, teaching them to the managers so they could go back and share them with their staff, and simply working on being focused and having multiple strategies for each new situation as it arose.
Super. Thank you very much for that, Susan. Okay, this can go really to anybody. What would happen if we stopped talking about clients and started talking about participants in the coaching process?
Oh, that's lovely. Who would like to start on that?
I love that concept. For me, that speaks to not only a shift in the coach-client relationship, but if we reflect that onto the leadership approach or a leadership style, I think that is what's being called upon, or what leaders are being called upon to be, is more of a partner with people in so many different ways.
I love that, Aileen. I love what you're bringing out there, and it would really, I think we do need some new terminology, because most of these coaching relationships, and I'm going to ask if that's true of both of you, become more partnerships. It's really a much more equal relationship than coach and client implies. So thank you for that brilliant question. Krishna, Aileen, more to say on that?
Yeah, I just love that concept as well. I think it's also a great learning and growth concept for us as coaches to shift how we see our role in the world and how we then enter into that relationship. And, you know, if we even look at mastery number one, establishing, maintaining a relationship of trust, you know, a trusting relationship within a partnership is at a different level for me from, you know, if there's still that almost transactional relationship between coach and client. And I'm reminded of today's earlier session, Ben, by the ladies who were talking about the coactive coaching and the integration, and they used the term a designed alliance, and they talked about how important it was to have a way of working with that alliance and about the relationship as well as the content or what happened within the relationship. I think it's another really key piece for us to attend to as we move forward into this next generation of both coaching and leadership.
Lovely. Krishna, do you have something to add?
What can I add? Both of you have said it. Actually, even the word, people use words like coachee, which actually, I mean, I still think that doesn't even sound very nice. And, and you know, the word client has so many different connotations. So who knows, Ben, I think we may have a new word, discovered today. This could actually be the beginning of many things. I really like the word participant, and it works both ways, coach and the person who's being coached. I really like that.
I do too.
It's an invitation for the coach to be a participant as well. I think that would be a great thread to keep the conversation going on that one too.
I absolutely think that what you're suggesting here is that we get on Facebook and be sure that that question is there, and make it almost a contest to see if we can't find a good way to redefine this relationship, that everyone will understand exactly what the magic of coaching is.
Yeah.
So I'm game for that. Great question. Ben, got another wonderful question for us?
Super. Thank you very much for that. What is the end of Mastery 2? So what is it that you're perceiving, affirming, and expanding the client's what?
Potential.
Potential. We will fix that before we post it.
Okay.
Perceiving, affirming, and expanding the client's potential.
Super. Um, okay. When you said that the new center connects all 9 masteries, does it mean that all these masteries are at play while coaching?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I know that's a very short answer, but a masterful coach, and no matter which system you're using as your organizing system for concept, whether you're using the ICF competencies or the Coachville proficiencies or the IAC masteries, the one thing that I believe unifies any organization's perception of masterful coaching is a masterful coach is able to weave all of these concepts together, to use all of these skills in a session with a client while they are at the same time furthering that person's agenda, helping that person, supporting that person in making progress in their life. So that sounds like a lot, but it's really what those of us who have been doing this for a long time and are good at doing it do on a daily basis. And I'm pretty sure that describes a great many people who have joined us this evening.
I think it would be fair to add, Susan, that the balance of how much different masteries show up can vary from one coaching conversation to the next, but they're usually all there to some degree.
Yes, thank you. That's a great clarification. Yeah. We probably have time for one more question, Ben.
Okay, one final question. Can you say more on knowing myself in the moment and in my emergence?
Okay. If we are not centered and aware of who we are and what we are bringing to a situation, we are really limited in the actions that we can take, and we're really limited in the possibilities we can even conceive of. So um, part of really establishing a coaching conversation is this moment of pausing and taking a breath and moving away from all those mind monkeys that are just jumping up and down as hard as they can in your head, to create a space where the two people are together in conversation and focusing on the immediacy of what they're talking about.
If I could add, Susan,
Please.
the the core of any coaching conversation is building awareness, and one of the most powerful coaching questions, as we all know, is who am I? And I think that's the essence of really the question that was asked, and it's probably the most difficult question for a person being coached to answer. uh, who am I? And to get to that, we use so many processes. I mean, we look in terms of getting the support of behavioral instruments and so on. But ultimately, it's all about getting a deeper sense of self-awareness, supporting the person being coached uh, to reach that state. I think that is really the essence of how coaching, a coaching conversation really takes place.
That was beautifully put, Krishna. And my apologies for the form this slide is showing up in, where you're seeing the whole deck. But I did want to let you know as we end the presentation that there is more information about the masteries on the organization's website, which is www.certifiedcoach.org. We will be making the slides available to you through Ben, and we will be on Facebook to continue this discussion and answer any additional questions you may have. It's been our great pleasure to be with you this evening. I'm sorry that the power of weather took Natalie away from us before the end of the presentation. And we look forward to continuing the dialogue with you.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Ben.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you very much to everyone for joining us today, and thank you so much to our lovely panelists for their super session. Not to worry about Natalie, these things happen. Once upon a time, we had a session we had to completely cancel just because there was an Indian wedding going on in the hotel with our presenters, and it was a huge wedding.